Welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. Cameron here in the past has not lived through the total lunar eclipse in Scorpio yet, so please pray for me because I have no idea what it's going to be about. But either way, if you're watching this, that means you are probably watching this post Scorpio eclipse or on the actual Scorpio eclipse exactly, unless you're a patron and you get these ad-free and early release. So if you're watching this on maybe Friday or Saturday, the Scorpio eclipse hasn't happened yet. But anyway, if you're on YouTube, you're watching this probably while the Scorpio eclipse is happening. And I'm saying this because this week, as we go into post-eclipse season, it's going to be radically different than these past 2 weeks were. I've been hounding you guys on this for weeks now, but how the astrology of May and that last week of April and the first couple weeks of May is like this microcosm of like what the next 4 years have in store. And I want you to really think about how much has really happened for you guys in this past 2 weeks. What is different for you now? And where are you at now that we're at this lunar eclipse? Anyway, let's go ahead and start talking about this week, because now that we are off of this eclipse, we get to actually start dealing with like more of the astrology. Like eclipse season is always like a portal in between worlds, and it's really weird. And it's kind of like, when something kind of crazy is happening in your life, but something else is too distracting to where you can't even pay attention to it. That's kind of like what eclipse season is. So this week, though, as we kind of get into it, getting off of this total lunar eclipse in Scorpio, we have Mars conjoining Neptune. And again, this is something I talked about last week with the eclipse, since the eclipse is like trining Mars and sextiling Mars, and it was ruled by Mars, and of course it's Mars conjoining Neptune. But we get to walk into that this week with a lot of confusion. As well, we have Mercury sextiling Jupiter. That is Mercury retrograde sextiling Jupiter, so they're both kind of applying towards each other, which looks pretty nice. And then as we get to the end of the week, that's when we get the Sun ingressing into Gemini and the Mercury cazimi at the same time. So this week starts off really confusing. However, it ends with a lot more clarity. And the clarity might be a little bit chaotic, but that's fine in my opinion. Let's go ahead and start with Monday. Monday, moon's going to enter Sagittarius. As it enters Sagittarius, again, this is like post-total lunar eclipse in Scorpio. So there's a lot of heightened feelings. There's a lot of intensity, especially around like the body and emotions. As the moon goes into Sagittarius and begins that waning phase, there's this kind of like the moon in Sagittarius after this total lunar eclipse in Scorpio is like, have you ever had to like have a really hard conversation that you didn't want to have? And so you ended up having to have it. And then it's like right when that conversation can be done and you can leave or you hang up the phone, it's like, ugh, like just get me out of there. That's what this moon in Sag transit's really going to feel like just this needing to escape, this needing to run away from things. It does go opposite Mercury right as it ingresses. So the moon will go into Sag. And you know what I always say, moon, our emotions, how we feel, it's in Sag, it's very explorative, very adventurous. But after like a lunar eclipse, it's kind of a little bit more avoidant and like, I need to run away. But it will be opposite Mercury retrograde in Gemini. So this isn't like a, have you ever needed to like think of, like, I'm the type of person that I like to respond rather than react. And so sometimes I need to like go away to figure things out so I can fully understand and comprehend the situation. And I feel like this moon in Sag going opposite Mercury will really be that. And of course, then it will trine Jupiter. Let's go ahead and put up the chart. I mean, the big thing here is, again, the moon's going to be in Sag going opposite Mercury. And as it goes opposite Mercury, like, well, actually, I think it hits. Oh, no, that's right. The moon does hit Jupiter first. So as the moon kind of hits Jupiter, I'm still a little bit, I don't know how I feel about Jupiter in Aries yet. And I simply think that's because Mars is still in Pisces, and it's on top of Neptune. And Mars and Jupiter are having what we call like mutual reception right now. So they're kind of in each other's signs. And typically that's like a good thing, but I always kind of look at mutual reception when they're like in the signs next to each other. Like, it's example, like when you get like Mars and Venus in each other's signs, and like Taurus and Aries. There's something about that house being cadent, that house being like the 12th house from the first house, if you know what I'm talking about, that makes it a little bit confusing and hard to see. So I just feel like this Jupiter and Aries stuff isn't going to really come alive until Mars ingresses. But as the moon's in Sagittarius, making that trine to Jupiter and Aries, there is this kind of like, hey, what can I do? Hey, where can I go? Jupiter and Aries, go big or go home. But as the moon kind of trines Jupiter, and there's this sense of like, okay, this is what I need to do. Okay, this is what I need to accomplish. Okay, this is what I believe in. Again, that Jupiter and Aries stuff is so like, you kind of have to put your actions first, and the faith will maybe come a little bit later. But then the moon goes opposite Mercury. So there is this kind of like looking at your situation a little bit differently. Like Mercury rules logistics and plans and communication. And so I think on Monday, also, did you guys notice that I put the little thing here in the corner? You're welcome. Also, by the way, all the Virgos, I know that the circle is not cropped perfectly. I'm not good at graphic design or any of this stuff. So I'm sorry. I'm going to figure out how to get this better. But this is why we do things during a Mercury retrograde. Moon's going to go opposite Mercury. You're going to have a change of plans, and you're going to be seeing things from a different perspective. And I think that perspective is going to be much more jovial, much more Jupiter of like, hey, we just got out of that total lunar eclipse. We handled what we had to handle. Let's move on to something bigger and better now. Like, it's kind of like, this is something that I try to incorporate in my life is like, whenever I have a really serious moment, especially like with a loved one or just something that's very like intense, I try to follow up with something fun and exciting afterwards. Because it's really hard to like have like a really intense, heavy conversation and not like, you don't want to keep that heavy energy there. You want to be able to like, hey, we handled that, we addressed it. Let's, have a positive experience. Let's create like a more incentivizing, more rewarding experience rather than just everything having to be harsh. So don't be afraid on Monday to be like, you know what, we handled something hard. Let's move on to something bigger. Let's, like it's kind of like after you have a hard conversation, like go get ice cream or something like that. Anyway, that's Monday. We go into Tuesday. That's when the moon, as it's going through Sagittarius, is going to be making a trine to Venus. That will be fun, but then it will square Mars and Neptune, and that won't be fun. And then the Mars-Neptune conjunction perfects on Tuesday. So it's a little bit of mixed feelings here. One is I like, of course, the moon and Sag trining Venus and Aries. But this Mars-Neptune stuff, guys, there's a few ways to kind of go about this. Well, let's just kind of talk about the moon first. So the moon's going to be in Sag, trining Venus to Aries. Again, Venus, fun, connection, and Aries, do this, do that. It's a little toxic, but it's fun. Moon and Sag trining Venus, there is this kind of like, wanting to explore, wanting to go out and do the things that you want to do. Like there is a lot of like if there was any day that a club would go up on a Tuesday, this would be a really lit Tuesday to go to the club. Also, living in Vegas for so long and working on like the strip in downtown, moon and Sag transits. It doesn't matter what day it is. The moon and Sag, everyone's always out partying. But the moon's going to be in Sag, trining Venus and Aries. Again, Venus is in like fall. So as much as you might want to be going for what you want and thinking it is what you want, there is this dissatisfaction with getting it. So, I mean, like it's Venus in detriment, right? She doesn't have dignity there. So there is this like, sure, seeking, pleasure and looking for that immediate reward. You think that's going to gratify you, but it doesn't. So that moon trining Venus, you might try to like use the escapism a little bit and the pleasure seeking. But then Mars conjoins Neptune. And it's like kind of a two-way street for a lot of us. When I say a lot of us, I mean like me included. There's going to be a lot of confusion here. Mars is about, again, action, energy, drive, and it's on top of Neptune. And so, again, Neptune can saturate things and make things, like I always like to say, like Neptune can make things kind of like an Instagram filter almost in a sense. And, things look better in an Instagram filter. However, the truth is distorted. And I think as Mars is, again, if Mars's job is to, take action, have energy, have drive, and it's in Jupiter's sign, it has Jupiter's tools. So it's taking this action using, again, Jupiter's tools, which is like philosophy, belief, faith, just pure optimism. And Jupiter's in Aries, there's this kind of like, and I talked about this last week, there's this kind of like, you kind of have to have some blind faith here. And that's not going to be fun for everybody. Like, especially like when your senses, like I like to think about Neptune and being about like fog, and you can't see anything when you're in the fog, and you kind of have to rely on different senses to move about. And that can be like really scary. That can be really frustrating, especially when, all your life you've only navigated yourself through one way, and now you have to trust a different way of navigating life. It's going to be kind of emotional for a lot of people, but this is one of those times of like, not to get into the woo-woo stuff, go back to the Pisces stuff. You're going to have to like literally have some kind of blind faith and, kind of a Jesus walk on water moment where you're just going to have to walk on water and kind of believe that that's what's going on. Because the other part of it is if you are the second you start questioning, the second you start going everywhere, it's going to be so confusing and so all over the place that it's going to feel overwhelming and you're going to feel very, very lost. So that Mars Neptune stuff is like, you guys just have to take one step at a time. How much do you trust your own senses and your own intake of your senses? Something we did in I've talked about this before. One time I volunteered at a youth camp here in Colorado, and it's called Higher Ground. I'm very passionate about it. But pretty much what we do is we take inner city youth, we teach them leadership skills, teamwork skills, all that kind of stuff. And something that we do is like when they first get to the camp, we do like a kind of like a hike type of thing. And we put these kids with like blindfolds, and we have to, as coaches, guide them through this trail. And it's this exercise in, can you trust your like leader? Can you trust someone that you don't know? Can you trust someone in like navigating, or because I mean, and these kids will go all off the fucking trail. Like sometimes we're like, okay, you need to go back right on the trail. But the whole idea is it's just about trust and listening too. Because, when you can't see anything and you still have to walk on a trail and you can't see that trail, I mean, you also have to rely more on your feet to feel like what if you're on the grass or if you're on the trail. So I just want you to think about taking things like being blindfolded. And, don't think about blindfolding as like, oh my God, I can't see what's in front of me, but think of it as like a trust exercise in your own like senses and navigating your own sense. And also, who is guiding you? Is that for some people that's yourself, for some people that's your fear, for some people that's God? Who's guiding you? And whose directions are you listening to? And I just think on Tuesday, as the moon's in Sag too, there is this kind of like looking at the bigger perspective. And I think Mars conjoining Neptune, Neptune does rule deception. Neptune does rule like being deceived and not seeing, things like in all clarity. So another analogy I'd like to use is, if you think you're seeing everything clearly, you're not. Like, you are either being blindfolded for better or for worse, right? So this is one of those things where, let's say you're one of the people like, oh, I'm loving Mars conjoining Neptune. Everything's rosy, everything's good. It's a little distorted. But if you're one of those people that's like, oh my God, like I can't see anything, where am I going? It's like, hey, fucking calm down for a second and just, get back in your body, feel your feet and guide yourself, just again, Mars in Pisces is one step at a time. You really can't rush this stuff. Trust me, we're going to be rushing when Mars goes into Aries. So anyway, that was a long rant about fucking Tuesday. Anyway, Wednesday. We get to Wednesday on the 18th. The moon's going to ingress into Capricorn, and it's going to square Jupiter. Not that bad. Again, I love moon and Capricorn transits. I just think they're great times to detach from everything, get your work focused on. But as the moon goes into Capricorn and, are emotionally, right, we're going to be like kind of detached, a little cold and clammy. It's going to be squaring Jupiter in Aries, where like Jupiter in Aries doesn't really care. Like the moon in Capricorn might be like, hey, this is a workplace. You need to like control yourself. This is why I can't have a job. Like I was always the troublemaker, but like I always was like top of sales or like top of my, like whether it was DJing weddings or like when I worked on like the strip and stuff like that, I was always like distracted and hanging out with people and not doing my job. But then I would always like be like the best at my job. And this moon in Capricorn squaring Jupiter in Aries just reminds me of like people, like my bosses used to be like, hey, you need to like get your shit together. And like, you need to stop being so, yourself. And I was like, I mean, like I'm fucking killing it in sales. So I'm going to do whatever I want anyway. And so I look at this moon in Aries, moon in Capricorn squaring Jupiter in Aries. And, like, don't worry about like professionalism. Like moon in Capricorn is so like, can't express, can't feel, everything's got to be contained. And it's going to be squaring Jupiter in Aries, where Jupiter is just like, Jupiter in Aries is very Kool-Aid man energy, just like jumping, breaking through the door, busting through the walls, saying what's up. And I just think that moon in Capricorn squaring Jupiter in Aries, I think if you are, what's a good example of this? Like, you're not going to be able, like, there's going to be times where you do have to contain your emotions, and Jupiter in Aries sometimes is a little bit too big and a little bit too loud for everybody. Not everyone's going to be able to handle that, and there's times and places for that. So I think a lot of Wednesday is like a mixture of like getting yourself serious and professional while also like maintaining that Jupiter in Aries like ambition and fun and excitement. So on Wednesday, you're going to be like, oh, I got to do all this stuff. I want to do all this stuff, but I need to get my shit together. Like, but, you know, like the boss is here and I need to keep it a little bit cool. And so it's kind of like when your friends are at work and you're trying to, again, like keep your cool and it's just not working that well. Anyway, Wednesday's pretty interesting. Not a lot really going on. We get to Thursday, though. Moon's going to make a square to Venus as it's in Capricorn, and then the moon will sextile Mars, and then the moon will conjoin Pluto. This moon in Capricorn transit's a little weird, in my opinion. Like, typically, I mean, again, moon and Capricorn transits are a great time to, like, detach from your emotions, get more, like, involved in your work and whatever it is that you're, or your responsibilities. But as the moon makes the square to Venus in Aries, it's not fun. Boo, not fun. Moon in Capricorn, like, it's kind of like when you're at work and everyone's having a good time and your boss is like, hey, no more having a good time. Like, what the fuck? That's how this is why I can't have a job. This is the way I act in offices and stuff like that. But the moon in Capricorn squaring Venus in Aries is very like, hey, you need to keep your shit under control. And because this Venus and Aries stuff, it's like, you know, it's inappropriate, I think is a good way to, a good word to use. So while Venus is in Aries and you kind of want to have fun, you kind of like want to live dangerously as maybe a good way to look at it. This moon in Capricorn might kind of force you to be much more constructive about it. So this looks also very creative too. Like Venus, like the moon, you know, making an aspect to Venus is always like typically pretty good, but this is the moon in its sign of detriment and Venus in her sign of detriment. So I feel like if you're again like trying to have this fun stuff and you're like, yeah, this is what I want, I don't think you're gonna get that. It's not going to be as rewarding as you might think versus what might be more rewarding when on Thursday when the moon's in Capricorn squaring Venus and Aries is kind of like being much more kind of rigid or defined or it's like sculpting. I think of like sculpting things, like not like especially if it's like don't think about like creativity in the sporadic way, but think about it in this really planned, executed way. Moon's going to square Venus. I just think like maybe like even if you are like a creative person, like emotionally, there's going to be like some detachment with your work and you're going to have to kind of like, you know, it's not like there's the creative side of doing things and then there's like the intense work that goes with creativity and like criticism. This looks like a lot of criticism. So this would be good for criticizing your own work. But anyway, what was the other thing that's going on Thursday? Oh yeah. The moon's going to be sextiling Mars in Pisces. So there is this kind of like, hey, you know, again, Mars in Pisces is kind of, you know, picking things one step at a time. When you're driving in the fog, you're only looking at like one checkered line at a time, essentially. And I think as that moon sextiles Mars, there is this kind of like, okay, I see where this is going, where there might not have been a road before. The road is starting to look a little bit clear. And that comes from that moon-Venus square. And that moon-Venus square is like, hey, maybe you need to be a little bit like, hey, calm down a little bit. Like moon squaring Venus in Aries is like, haha, it's all fun and games, but stop for a second. Then the moon will sextile Mars where there's this like, okay, now that I've gotten my shit under control, I can kind of guide myself a little bit better. And then the moon will conjoin Pluto pretty much before it goes into Aquarius. I only put that in there because, you know, the Pluto stuff just kind of heightens the anxiety, heightens the intensity. And I just think with Mars on top of Neptune, the sun on top of the North Node, there's just a lot of heightened like energy. Like if you're like just like hypersensitive to vibrations and shit and frequencies, seems a little intense on Thursday. We get to Friday. Moon's gonna ingress into Aquarius. I love that I could just like walk all over this place. I love this green screen setup. This is so much fun. Moon's gonna go into Aquarius. It's going to sextile Jupiter, and then it's going to trine Mercury. There is a lot of this I like. I don't necessarily like the moon ingressing into Aquarius per se, but as it goes into Aquarius, again, more of the emotional detachment, looking at things through a bigger picture, looking at, you know, life through the lens of like society and, you know, big groups of people. And I think as the moon goes into Aquarius, first sextiles Jupiter. Oh, by the way, I meant to write this down. Fuck. This is when Mercury sextiles Jupiter, by the way. Or actually, it's the day before. On Thursday, Mercury sextiles Jupiter. Let me rewind here. This is why we do this on a Mercury retrograde. I'm learning how to do all this stuff again. Yeah, Mercury's going to sextile Jupiter. And again, it's Mercury retrograde. We're rethinking, we're revisiting. Jupiter's in Aries. And there's this kind of like, again, Mercury's like the plan and the logistics, and Jupiter's like the dream and the vision. And so these two planets are coming together. And so the dream and the plan and the vision are all kind of coming together, maybe not in circumstances that you were expecting, because it is Mercury retrograde, but just a lot of things start to make sense, I think, on Friday, as you kind of start to put the pieces together. Hold on, there we go. Friday, moon goes into Aquarius. It's going to sextile Jupiter. It's going to trine Mercury. You know, this seems like a lot of the conversations that need to happen, like it's like one of those days where, have you ever been like kind of in limbo and then you needed like a bunch of things to happen? All the things that need to happen on Friday. You know, moon in Aquarius trining Mercury, the conversations that need to be had. The moon is going to be sextiling Jupiter. Whether that's the opportunities, or Jupiter's often like getting something, like you were given something, or you were rewarded with something, or there is some type of expansion. I mean, Jupiter just entered Aries, so the moon going into Aquarius, doing all these connections is kind of like bringing down the Jupiter and Aries stuff, whatever is expanding. I mean, Jupiter is expanding a part of your chart. Look at what house Aries rules in your chart. That's where Jupiter's expanding. It's where you're getting more opportunities, more gifts, more abundance, where you need to be more grateful for too, because it could be worse. And that moon sextiling Jupiter is kind of like, again, bringing that down to earth, maybe kind of like, you know, for example, like if you just started school, or you're about to start college, like moon going into Aquarius is like you're signing all the contracts, you're getting used to the new area, like everything kind of starts to come together on Friday. Hold on. Saturday. I have had this song stuck in my head via Saturday Love. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You guys know what I'm talking about. The real ones know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Saturday, we get a few things. The sun goes into Gemini. Mercury, Cazimi. The moon will then sextile Venus and conjoin Saturn and square Uranus. A lot of clarity on Saturday. And I think, that really does start with the moon going into Aquarius, trining Mercury, trining Jupiter. The sun goes into Gemini. We're in Gemini season, and we're getting ready for summer. We're out of the Taurus season stuff. The air is starting to change. I talk a lot about that in my course. I've been thinking a lot about just the quality of the air and the summer breeze that really rolls in with Gemini season. But anyway, sun's going to go into Gemini. And there's this Mercury Cazimi. Again, we can rewind to April 30th when we had Mercury at this spot at the sky, 0 Gemini, and that was that eclipse. We're having something about that. We're coming back to something about that. There's a lot more clarity on the situation as far as like plans, logistics, communication. Look at what Gemini rules in your chart. A lot of that gets purified and cleaned up if it has been a little bit confusing. But the moon will be, again, in Aquarius. It's going to sextile Venus. So that there is this kind of like getting what you want without necessarily being involved. Like, moon in Aquarius, sextile Venus in Aries. I can only think of like inappropriate examples, but like one of them would be like, you start like, let's say you start a new job and you're like, oh, one of my coworkers is hot. Like, that's nice. Like moon in Aquarius, sextile Venus in Aries is like something that you're not really like attached to being a part of, like Venus in Aries. There's something fun about it. But then the moon's going to conjoin Saturn, where there is this like, but they're your coworker. gotta have the boundaries. Gotta have the responsibilities there. But the moon does square Uranus though, and the moon actually, I believe, squares Uranus. Then it will sextile Venus, and then it conjoins Saturn. I know it's a little all over the place here, but as that moon squares Uranus too, like, a lot of the Aquarius stuff has a facade that it's fixated. But when you have like Saturn and Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus, like the things that you think are like Saturn and Aquarius, like let's say like an authority figure and an idea where that might be fixed, Uranus testifies and says that it's not fixed and that it's actually unstable. So when you have like, I guess just on Saturday, if you're thinking that things are rigid or that they're stable, that they're going to remain that way, that's not necessarily true. The moon's going to be going through Aquarius, squaring Uranus. There's going to be some, things that are kind of like random variables that you can't really account for. And then as the moon conjoins Saturn, though, I think by the end of the night, you're kind of clear on where things are at and where you need to like point your focus towards. Saturday looks pretty good. As far as, the sun going into Gemini too, get the sun off of the North Node. Yes, I've been enjoying the sun conjoining the North Node, but I think the sun getting out of the eclipse season, out of the nodal area, get it into Gemini. We haven't had the sun go through Gemini without eclipses in like 2 years. We get to finally have some just regular Gemini conversation without it being about like, what the past 2 years has been about. So maybe Gemini season and conversation can be fun again. And yeah, I mean, I should probably pull up the Saturday chart. Mercury, Cazimi, boop, and a lot of freshness. Moon's going to be conjoining Saturn. Let's go to Sunday. Sunday, the moon goes into Pisces, and it will square Mercury right as it ingresses into Pisces. And Mercury will also retrograde back into Taurus. How long is this? Oh, this has only been 25 minutes. Okay, I thought this was like a lot longer. Anyway, as the moon goes into Pisces, like, I like that for a lot of reasons, but what's interesting is once the moon moves into Aries, it will actually conjoin Mars and ingress with Mars going into Aries. So, like, if you want to talk about like a green room before a show, or like the locker room before a big game, like that's this moon in Pisces transit, in my opinion. But as the moon goes into Pisces, now that we've gone through the cold Aquarius stuff and the cold Capricorn stuff, there's this kind of like warmthness with the moon in Pisces. But I think as the moon's in Pisces squaring Mercury and Gemini, like, have you ever like had someone tell you something and it's not wrong, it makes sense, but you're not computing it correctly? That's the moon in Pisces squaring Mercury and Gemini. It's like, there's nothing wrong with the information. There's nothing wrong about anyone who's telling it. You're just not processing it weird because you're thinking about something else and you're daydreaming and you're not necessarily in reality. And that's okay. So what I would say is just like on Sunday, just like, don't expect to like, oh, it just all gets like figured out. Well, for example, too, I shouldn't say for example, what also testifies that is Mercury goes back into Taurus. So you can't see it here, but Mercury's going to go back into Taurus. And this is really important because as Mercury's been in Gemini, all the communication stuff, I mean, it's been like wacky because, I mean, like Mercury's been in shadow, so there's going to be, and it's been retrograde, so there's all these communication problems. But as it goes back into Taurus, it's going to really slow down, but it's going to be on the North Node where it's going to be like people from California are like professional like traffic drivers. Like we've learned to like harness our energy. Because there's times where you're like, oh, okay, it's traffic, whatever. I'm not in a rush. But then there's other times where, like, maybe it's a road that you're used to going fast on, and there's traffic, and you can't do it. You ever just fucking lose it? I lose it a little bit too much, but there are certain times when I'm driving where it's like, sometimes I'm like, I'm not in a rush. I'm cool. Everything's good. And then there's other times where I'm like, all right, I need to go, and no one's going, and there's nowhere to get off. That's what this Mercury going back into Taurus and conjoining the North Node and starting to square Saturn is like. It's like it's on the North Node, which creates this like anticipation to go forward and to go fast, but it's retrograde in this slow sign of Taurus squaring Saturn where it's like, you fucked up. You missed your exit, and now you're where you are, and there's no way around it. You might as well go grab a Starbucks if you're gonna be late for work. That's kind of what's going on, but I just feel like on Sunday, there's going to be this bigger slowdown, and as Mercury just goes into Taurus later in the afternoon, it's just going to feel like you're going to want things to go faster, but they're only going to go slower. It's kind of like when like how printers can like read your mind, and it's like when you need it to print, it doesn't print. That's what's going on with like your whole reality at this point. So like, it's one of those things of like, I was doing some yard work earlier, and there was like wasps and bees, and I was like super in tune with like, you can't show your fear of them. They will smell your fear and attack you. You have to be one with the bees and the wasps. That's what this is kind of like. Mercury going back into Taurus on the North Node is like, if you try to like push that more, it's only going to get harder. So that's this week. We get into next week, and I think it's actually really important to tee up next week because again, by the time you're watching this, it's on the eclipse. I haven't even experienced the eclipse yet. I'm doing this from the past. I record these on Friday mornings, and they're posted ad-free, an early release over on my Patreon. But next week, Mars goes into Aries. If you've been sleepy, you're going to wake up. Venus sextile Saturn. Fun. Venus goes into Taurus. I mean, we're going to have Saturn in Aquarius. We're going to have Venus in Taurus, Mars in Aries. So a lot of dignity. Mars conjoins Jupiter next week. Like, I can't believe it's already May. Like, we're almost done with May. We're almost June. 2022 is almost over, by the way. And then we get to this new moon in Gemini, which it's kind of like, Well, Gemini rules, it's a mutable sign, right? So it's about change, it's about transition, but it will feel a little bit weird since this is our first lunation in Gemini without eclipses being there. But it will feel like, so like a new moon is usually like a things getting settled, but this is a new moon in a mutable sign. So it's like it's kind of like when if you're playing poker, everyone folds, new hand. That's pretty much what's going on by the end of next week. New game of poker. Final thoughts. Oh, wait. I think it's this button. There we go. Final thoughts. I think a lot of this week is just reorganizing and replanning. I mean, like if you kind of go into it, we're having this total lunar eclipse in Scorpio on Sunday. So as we start next week, we're working with that energy, and it's a waning moon, right? We're kind of getting into this new moon. So if you're like trying to start new things and begin and like, no, like a lot of this week is just kind of like having the conversation you have to have, you know, reorganizing and re-strategizing yourself the way that you need to. And by the time we get to next week, that's when it's going to be about like doing new and bigger things. Yes, next week has like the waning moon still, but we have Mars, Jupiter next week. Mars goes into Aries, Venus goes into Taurus. Lots and lots of good next week, but it takes this week to kind of like get out of it and kind of adjust and get a little bit more clarity. I think we also have to have that Mars Neptune conjunction to kind of like, you know, you're not going to see everything moving forward, and that's okay. It's just hard. You know, none of this stuff is easy. It's really frustrating when I talk about like people are like, when is it going to get easier? When is it going to get better? God, like fucking look around. Like some people right now are going through some of the best moments in their life. Some people are going through the worst. And a part of that is your own natal chart and your own astrology. But the other part of that is like, how do you like, you know, it's amazing how many people, it's like, astrology is great to have to put blame onto things, right? It helps us interpret why things are the way that they are. But that doesn't mean you are out of taking responsibility for your own life. Like if you really want things to be better and change, do what it fucking takes to do it. You have literally everything that you need more than ever now with the internet and things like that. But it's much more of like, I don't want to say like, oh, this is a bad or a good week. I think this week though, just seems very hard to navigate, simply because we're getting off this intense eclipse stuff. We're going into the Mars Jupiter stuff, and again, like when is it going to get better for people? It's like, well, this could be Mars Jupiter can be really bad for people. For some people, it's going to be really good. Again, it just kind of depends on how you operate and how you live your life, and also your birth chart. But I think if there was anything to really take away from this week, it's like, hey, take it like that Mars Neptune stuff, like. You like the hard stuff happens for a reason. Like I want you to think about all this winter. I talked about doing the hard stuff in the winter. Do the hard things during the hard times. Kind of go back to that because I think any lessons you might have learned back then might help you now. Especially as Mars conjoins Neptune, especially as we have Mars going into Aries too. So I guess just like, I think it's really easy to maybe get caught in this moment, but I want you to kind of reflect on these past 6 months and how that's led you to where you're at right now. But anyway, I'll leave you guys off with that. Thank you so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next week.